Welcome to the first lecture of Unit 6. Unit 6 follows directly after the Revolutionary War. The Americans have just won the Revolutionary War, and what we're looking at now is the fact that they are a brand new country. They have to figure out how their country is going to run. Throughout this unit, we will see them introduce an idea for a government that does not necessarily work out perfectly, and then what they have to do to fix that and the ideas that they come up with to eventually create what we know today as the Constitution and what runs the government of the United States today. The Americans had just broken away from the harsh rule of Britain and the King. As Americans planned their first national government, the idea that they want to focus on the most is preventing a government from treating the people like Britain had treated them. They want to make sure that the national government, which would be like the king or the people that are making the laws or anything like that, they want to make sure that that government is not able to just take over and do whatever they want like Britain had done to the Americans, passing laws without their representation or consent or anything like that. The American leaders wanted to make sure that people in the country had more control over their government, so it was decided that the government would be a republic. A republic is something that we have talked about a lot, but not necessarily said the word republic. It is basically a representative form of government where people in the country choose other people to go to some location to vote for them, like representation and representatives. It is the example that I talk about with people. If we had a school-wide vote, we'd have one person from each classroom. Each classroom would vote on a person to go up to the office and vote yes or no for us. It's the same basic concept. That is what a republic is. During the Revolutionary War, each state created its own constitution, and each state wants to make sure that they add more representation to the system. So each state wanted to make sure that the people in their state had more say than the people had under the rule of the British. In 1776, the Continental Congress planned out a system of government for the country. They agreed on the fact that it was going to be a republic, but they disagreed on whether each state would have one vote in the Congress that they're going to set up, or if voting should be based on population. So the larger the state, the more votes you get. Or should each state, no matter what, have the same amount of votes? The problem here is if you have two states that are right next to each other, but one is this big over here and one is a lot larger. The problem is if this state gets 15 votes and this state gets 1, the smaller state is never really going to have much of a say or much of an input, but that's kind of what it should be like because this state has more people. The larger state has more people, so they should have more say. The smaller state should have less say in a truly democratic system. The other way to look at it is if you have two states, one larger and one smaller, and each of them get one vote. Well, that's good for the small state, but the larger state thinks that's unfair because they have more people in the larger state, yet they are being counted at the same amount as a few amount of people in the smaller state. So that's an issue that they're going to struggle with all the way up through the end of this unit, really. They also had to decide who would control the Northwest Territory, which is an area of the Ohio River Valley, includes Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, places like that around the Great Lakes. Eventually, Congress picked a plan, and they called that plan the Articles of Confederation. So the Articles of Confederation are the first form of government of the United States that they have after the war. This plan created the Confederation Congress, which would be the central or national government of the United States. The Confederation Congress was allowed to do a few things, but the really important things they could not do. What they could do is that they could wage war, make peace, sign treaties, run Indian affairs, and issue money. All of these things are really large things. They are really big, overseeing, large scope things, but they don't really have a lot of importance in just the day-to-day operations of a government. The states had the authority to do the more important things. They could set taxes. So because the states can do this, that means that Congress cannot. So the states can set taxes, Congress cannot. The states also can enforce national laws. So let's say that this Congress makes a law. The state says that they don't like this law. Well, it's up to the state to punish the people in that state for not following this national law. And if the states don't like it, then they're not going to enforce it. A way to think about this is, if your parents are the national government and you are the states, and they say, okay, this is our rule, this is our law that we're passing on to you. You have to be back home by your curfew at 11 o'clock. But it's your responsibility to punish yourself if you are not on time. So, in that situation, if you walk in at 11:30 instead of 11, you've broken curfew, but it's up to you to ground yourself. Now, are you going to be very enthusiastic about grounding yourself or really care that you're even late? Probably not. So, if you're not grounding yourself, then is there really even a curfew? I mean, you could come in anytime you want and not punish yourself, really, because there's no one that's going to tell you to punish yourself other than yourself. So what this means is that Congress is very, very weak, and they don't have a lot of power over the states, and they can't make any money because they can't set taxes. In order for the Articles of Confederation to become the government, it had to be sent out to the states for what we call ratification, which means approval. By 1787, 8 states had ratified the Articles, but some of the smaller states would not accept it because they were not given control of lands in the West or the Northwest Territory. States without land would not be able to pay off their debts. Gradually, all states gave up their claims to Western lands back to the national government, and this led all 13 states to ratify the Articles of Confederation. So basically what has happened is, previously, maybe Pennsylvania would get all of this land out here, and then New Jersey would get none of it. Well, that makes Pennsylvania a lot larger, and that means they have more resources and get more money and all this kind of stuff. So what happens is, in order to the betterment of the whole process, they say that, well, the larger states say, okay, we'll give up this territory, and all of this can be controlled by Congress. They'll figure out what to do with it. We'll stay in the same size we are just to make everybody happy. So that's called, compromising a little bit. Strengths and weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. We will talk about one major strength, one thing that they do well, and then we will look at ultimately the vast majority of things are weaknesses. One thing that Congress handled well was the land in the West it now owned, which was the Northwest Territory. The first step they take is they pass the Land Ordinance of 1785. This Land Ordinance of 1785, if we go back to this map, the Land Ordinance of 1785 basically takes this land and puts a system of grids on it. And each of these little squares will be called a township. And, there'd be Township 1, Township 2, Township 3, all of this kind of stuff. And that's overall the area. And then that way it puts a little order to all of this. Instead of it being just a big glob of land, you have structure. You have areas that you can say, you are living in Township 1, there are 100 people living in Township 1, or whatever the case may be. So that is the Land Ordinance of 1785. It has to do with dividing up the land. That's where, the surveyors go out, they map out the 6 square mile plots, and now that the land is mapped out, Congress had to decide how it would be governed. So how do we include these people into the country? To do that, to govern the land, they passed the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. This stated that as a territory grew, it would gain rights to self-government. Namely, if you got to 60,000 people in one area, you could apply to become a state. And as you grew, like if you had 5,000 people, you got something. If you got 10,000 people, you got something else. But once you get to 60,000 people, you could become a state. Some weaknesses. The Articles of Confederation set up a problem with foreign nations. Congress did not have the power to stand up and face other nations. This led to less trade with other countries. Because if you borrow $20 from somebody, and then 3 months later you still haven't paid back that $20, that person, and then you go to that person and say, hey, can I have $20 more? That person's going to say, no, you haven't paid me back the $20 you owed me from the last time. Why the heck would I give you $20 now? There's no way. And I'm not going to want to do any business with you, so get out of here. So these countries, are not wanting to trade with us. And then also what happens, the Congress cannot collect taxes, so they can't fund an army or a navy or anything to protect ourselves. So Spain and Britain are, attacking our merchant ships, saying, hey, you need to pay us back, you need to give us money, we want our money, and we're going to take it from you no matter what by overtaking your merchant ships. And that leads to even more problems with trade, and we can't stand up for ourselves. We're just very, very weak. The Congress is very weak because they can't collect taxes, and they can't make any money, and they can't make any laws or enforce trade laws or anything like that. Another weakness that comes up is economic problems and Shay's rebellion. The Congress could not collect taxes, so they relied on states to send them money. But if you didn't send them money, if the states didn't send the Congress money, there wasn't a punishment for it. You just didn't do it, and that's fine because the states again are in charge of enforcing the national laws. The two things together, not being able to trade and not being able to collect taxes, means that the national government had no money and was very weak. With no money, the country could not pay back its soldiers. And this leads us to Shay's rebellion. The fact that soldiers were not getting paid leads to Shay's rebellion. Shay led a march on the Federal Arsenal, which is a place where they store a lot of weapons. After some success, he basically is on the verge of, destroying the government of Massachusetts, taking it all the way over. This little group of farmers and soldiers with, weapons that they stole. But eventually, the state militia defeats Shay's men. But this opens people's eyes a little bit. They look at this situation, they realize, if only a small armed group of farmers and soldiers could cause so much trouble to the nation, what would happen if Spain or Britain came over and decided that they were going to take us over? We would be in a lot of trouble because the national government couldn't even protect themselves against some little farmers and soldiers. So they're hoping to fix these problems with the trade and with Shay's rebellion by giving more power to the national government. And by wanting to do this, giving more power to the national government, they decide that they're going to meet and have the Constitutional Convention and start formulating a new government. And that's what Lecture 2 will be about.